Welcome to our panel on Mindanao history, politics, and culture. This panel shares stories of Mindanao, unheard and unwritten in official history textbooks, and the politics that have kept up long-term and deep-seated prejudices against the island and its people, the Moro Filipinos. Such prejudices continue to be systematically spread by ignorance and miseducation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker who will be presenting, Dr. Patricio N. Abinales, or Dr. Jojo Abinales, retired as professor from the Department of Asian Studies at the University of Hawaii, Manoa in 2025. Now lang. He is author and co-author of the following books: Presidents and Pests, Cosmopolitans and Communists, Making Mindanao, Cotabato and Davao in the Formation of the Philippine Nation State, State and Society in the Philippines, co-authored with Donna Amoroso, The Contemporary World, co-authored with Lisandro Claudio, Orthodoxy and History in the Muslim Mindanao Narrative, Fellow Traveler Essays on Filipino Communism, and Images of State Power, Essays on Philippine Politics from the Margins. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jojo Abinales.
Thank you. Let me start with deviating from my script. And, What? Oh, yeah. And if you witnessed the performance today, the gongs, in 2008, Muslim communities had to bury them for 10 years because their villages were being attacked by the military. And if the rebels seized the gongs, they would turn it into guns. So one of the fascinating things that I was experiencing in 2008 is old people teaching their grandchildren how to play this. That's the first thing that I want you to keep in mind. Second, keep in mind that 40% of Filipinos still think Muslims can go amok. Okay? This is being exoticized. Ask a Filipino how many Muslim friends they have. Almost zero. Okay? Third, so I go back to my script now. Last Wednesday, there was a presentation of the Right Tattoo volume works of Renato Constantino. The Philippines a past revisited. What was peculiar about it is there's very little mention of Mindanao and Muslims, and we're all wrong. And volume 2 has nothing on Mindanao Muslims alone. Let me cite you some of the erroneous things from that book. It talks about the Muslims as being on the threshold of an Asiatic form of feudalism. It's like projecting a Marxist analysis on the South. The book talks about some trading that went on between communities and foreign traders. But if you look at the history of the Philippine South, it had an extensive connection that went as far as northeastern Africa and China. In fact, the Chinese emperor had a tomb specifically devoted to one of the sultanates, the Sultan of Sulu, who had extensive trading in this area. The third is that this book describes Muslim Mindanao as being a beleaguered fortress during the Spanish colonial era, but in real terms, for 250 years, the Spaniards were fighting a defensive position against Muslims, such that the sea between the island of Mindanao and the rest of the Philippines was called by the Spaniards as La Mer de Moro. Okay, it was only in the 1860s, a few years before Spain fell, that the Spaniards were able to establish a presence in Mindanao. So, what is weird about Mindanao in the story of the Philippines is it doesn't exist. Okay? And it's very ironical because this island is an area of 94,630 kilometers, almost as big as South Korea, larger than Hungary, Portugal, Austria, the Czech Republic, and twice the size of the Netherlands and Taiwan. And if you compare the histories written about these countries and the histories written about my home island, you can see the difference. It's the 7th most populous island in the world. The communities in these places have longer histories than a nation state, with widespread connections across maritime Southeast Asia, with people who speak several languages. I study smugglers in the Philippine South, and they're the most polyglot communities in the Philippines, speaking 7 to 8 languages, including Mandarin Chinese, Hokkien, the 3 Muslim languages. If you go to Manila and ask a Filipino how many languages they speak, 2, 3, So it is also a community that has been completely ignored by the Philippine state, looked upon as a source of land, looked upon as the volatile. My Filipino families in Manila, you say, I'm going to Mindanao, and they say, oh, don't go there, okay? It is borderline, it's fuzzy line, full of smugglers, killers, rebels, etc. And it's the back door where everybody goes. But if you go to Tawi-Tawi today, it's one of the freest zones in the world. And so what I've argued in my book is that for 2 things. One, and I said it yesterday, if you stand on the bottom of Tawi-Tawi Island, which is 3 hours from Sabah, and you look up north and you ask a Muslim, what does Philippine history look like? It's none. Because their image, most of these Muslim communities' image of the Philippine state, is a soldier shooting at them. Not a development worker, not a Filipino student at all. And up to now even, there are communities in the South where when they play the Philippine national anthem, they sit down with pride. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Father Albert Alejo, or Paring Bert, is immersed in popular spirituality and social issues. In the 1970s martial law Philippines, his immersion led him to get attracted to Jesuit mission of faith and justice. He co-founded the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Education, the Mindanaoan Initiatives for Cultural Dialogue, the Sacred Springs Dialogue Institute on Spirituality and Sustainability, and the Amumas Cancer Support Group Foundation. He has published books on spirituality and religions, as well as 3 poetry anthologies. Paring Bert serves as board member of No Peace Without Justice, while teaching at the Faculty of Social Sciences of the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. Father Alejo, you have 8 minutes.
8 minutes. So given the situation, what can we do? We cannot just lament. So some people say, then we need the reflection and dialogue. Then maybe we need peace education next. But before we ask what can we do, we need to check first to what extent are we, including the schools and the institutions, including Catholic educational institutions, what are we contributing to the unpeace before we can move to peace education. There are books on biases, like this, Roots of Conflict, Muslims, Christians, and Mindanao Struggle, the perceptions and understandings that Muslims and Christians have of each other, lack objectivity, and are colored by strong biases. Both have biases, but the Christian biases against the Muslims are stronger. Next. So reflect on our participation in Mindanao and peace. Next. Now, we don't go to the battlefront. We go to an ordinary classroom. I bought a poster of the national symbols of the country. And I asked, what is, next. Next, please. Yeah. What is the national leaf? Anahaw. National flower, sampagita. National fish, bangus. What is the national food? Roasted pig. And I bought posters from national bookstores, from Cebu, from Manila, from Davao, from different editions. At the center of the poster would be roasted pig, lechon, as the national food. Now imagine if you're a Muslim and a Muslim student in the classroom, how would you feel? And the poor, cute teacher probably is not aware that even in the daintiness of an ordinary classroom, she or he might be propagating biases and conflict. not in the battlefront. Next. We analyze other textbooks, 60 textbooks, not the thick ones, because they're inaccessible anyway. These are the textbooks that proliferate in our classrooms. Next. In one textbook, there are several. I'll give you just some examples. This is a grade 2 textbook about children in Mindanao. About 500,000 children in Mindanao always have to migrate because of frequent fighting between soldiers and rebels. Look at the illustration. And second part, lower part of this same page, next. Next, please. Many young boys are convinced by Muslim terrorists to join them. This is grade 2 textbook. Next. So there's failure of public education because of the nationalistic educational policy formulated from within the cultural, religious, and political worldviews of Manila. Manila-centered elite was widely experienced as homogenization of Filipino identity hostile to Muslim Filipino identities. Next. The Manila-centered educational elite continued to hold the power. So many textbooks, as he says, are thick on Philippine history and culture, but very little is mentioned on Mindanao, and mostly about the Muslims connected with conflict. What about the indigenous peoples? They are placed in prehistory. Next. And the Catholic educational institutions are not exempted from this. Schools, colleges, and universities acknowledged as neutral agents of change can play a strategic role. The problem is even in the textbooks used in the Catholic educational institutions are also faulty. So what do we do next now? Next. Catholic Church in general and Catholic educational institutions in particular are weighed down by baggages of biases in history. So one measure, I suppose, is how they moved Christians into admitting that they play a part in the historical marginalization of the minority. So, next. There have been attempts to rewrite history so that we can understand Mindanao history. There was need for research-based, peace education. Next. We even had an attempt to have several volumes on modules to insert Mindanao history properly into the curriculum. But unfortunately, some of these initiatives never really took off. Next. And so I proposed Mindanao Sulu timeline history infographics, something that can be easily used and posted inside the classroom. And so we consulted researchers, but I realized we cannot expect the historical researchers that produce thick books to write the catechesis on Mindanao history. At the same time, the journalists cannot be expected to do original research. And so we combined the two. And secondly, so we thought of infographics. We said history should not just political history, conflict, and the peace. We integrated cultural history, social history, assistance please, and even ecological history. And the result, the result is this, after the consultation, the result is an infographic. Sorry, I printed only a smaller version. It should be big like this, like that, so that the teachers, without doing original research, could actually explain the history. Now, we need to reproduce this, and secondly, we need publishers, we need to produce a manual for using this. I can tell more about how to use this, but we hope that this could be a contribution. Can we really have an agreed upon common reading of history in Mindanao that does not hide the massacres, but does not hide either the peace agreements? Can we have a history that includes not just political history, but also economic, cultural, and even ecological history? And can we include the history of Mindanao that includes the pre-Christian and pre-Islamic Mindanao? We hope that this could be a contribution to peace education. Thank you.
Let me now introduce the final speaker for the panel. Thomas McKenna is an anthropologist who has lived and worked for years in Moro communities in the Philippines and has spent decades writing and conducting research on their culture and history. As an academic, he has won writing and teaching awards and has been invited to present his work on the Moros at Oxford University, the U.S. State Department, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He is the author of Muslim Rulers and Rebels and a number of other published works, and he lives with his wife in San Francisco. You have 8 minutes as well.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about Mindanao, and I'm particularly pleased to be sharing this stage with two extraordinary scholars and activists who also happen to be two of the most knowledgeable people I know when the topic is Mindanao. Today, my topic, to wrap up and provide some historical context is three wars in Mindanao. So, 3 times in the 20th century, the Moro homeland, the homeland of the Moros, who were the indigenous Muslim peoples of Mindanao, was invaded by outside forces, and 3 times the Moros fought to repel those outside forces and protect their communities. Those 3 wars have defined the modern history of Mindanao, but are still almost unknown in both the Philippines and throughout the world. So let me talk about them a bit, and let me start with an origin story here on the map, which is also a bit of or maybe more accurately, an original sin. So in 1899, the United States, newly victorious in their first war of overseas imperial expansion, the Spanish-American War, was just about to acquire Spain's Pacific colonies, of which the jewel in the crown was the Philippines. 3 of the 5 members of the panel negotiating with Spain about the surrender and the acquisition recommended that the American acquisition not include Mindanao or Sulu because the Spanish had never actually controlled Mindanao or Sulu. But President William McKinley, who knew nothing at all about the Philippines, looked at a map like this and decided that he wanted all 3 colors, not just 2. He wanted the entire archipelago, and so decided that the United States should also possess Mindanao and Sulu. Now, we don't know what might have happened if he had listened to those advisors, but we can say for certain that decision of his that the United States should possess the homeland of the Moros led to the first war in Mindanao in the 20th century, which is usually referred to as the Moro Wars. The next slide, please. The American war against the Moros was not a conventional war because the Moros were not conventional fighters. They did not wear uniforms and march in ranks like the Philippine Revolutionary Forces of the North. But they were familiar enemies, in a sense, to the American soldiers fighting them because of their individual bravery, their colorful battle dress. They reminded American soldiers, many of them who were veterans of the Indian Wars of just 20 years earlier, of the Sioux or Apache warriors. So you can see in this rather fanciful American illustration of the Moro Wars, a very popular picture. You can see that it's very much modeled on the Indian Wars. It sort of looks like Custer's Last Stand and so forth. And except in this battle, the Americans aren't supposed to be losing, although they did lose multiple battles. But when the But of course, the Americans also used overwhelming force against the Moros. And when their machine guns and their artillery knocked down the log forts of Moro fighters, the Moros started a guerrilla war. And the Americans chased those guerrillas through swamps and jungles for years in attempts to catch them. When the war became a guerrilla war, the American terminology changed as well. So originally they were calling them by the exact same names that they called their Indian enemies on the American frontier. They called them savages and renegades. And when it became a guerrilla war, they also added terms like bandits and outlaws. The American occupation of Mindanao was finally secured in 1913, and that was done in large part as a result of massacres, large massacres, the largest of which at Bud Daho on the island of Jolo in 1906 resulted in the deaths of 800 men, women, and children. This was by far, this massacre was far larger than, for example, the Wounded Knee Massacre, the famous Wounded Knee Massacre in the United States, or the My Lai Massacre in Vietnam. Those were both 250, 300 people killed. And those massacres are justifiably infamous, and multiple books have been written about each of them. But the massacre at Bud Daho is still almost unknown, again, both in the Philippines and throughout the world. Next slide, please. Well, here we are 30 years later, about to start the second war in Mindanao, and which is, of course, in 1941, the war against the Japanese. And here we have what looks like the Moros and Americans fighting together. How did that come about? This is the cover of my most recent book called Moro Warrior, which is about Moro guerrillas in World War II in Mindanao. Well, a couple of reasons why the sides, why the alliances changed. On the one hand, the Americans helped themselves out by not attempting to, once they had controlled Mindanao, did not attempt to convert the Moros to Christianity. This is in stark contrast to their Spanish predecessors. Also, there was some adaptation on the part of Moros to new circumstances, and they began to see the Americans as providing a buffer between them and their traditional, a protective buffer between them and their traditional enemies, the Christian Filipinos from the north. But also, really, it was simply a matter of their homeland was being invaded again, this time by the Japanese. Now, it's well known that the Philippines had the largest and most successful guerrilla movement in all of the Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and also that Mindanao had the largest and most successful movement in the Philippines. What is not known is that the Moros were the most successful guerrillas in all of Mindanao, thus in the entire Pacific War. But before this book, that has hardly been recognized.
2 minutes.
Let me give you a couple examples of Moro successes as guerrillas in World War II. My first example comes from just the first few weeks of the war, just a couple of weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. At that time, Moro volunteers signed an oath of service to go fight the Japanese near Davao in Mindanao at the Battle of Digos. And they were formed into Bolo battalions, which were so called because the volunteers in those battalions were not provided guns. They were expected to fight the Japanese who had, of course, tanks and machine guns with only steel blades. That was not what the Moros wanted. The Moros wanted guns and expected to receive guns. But in 1941 in the Philippines, firearms were a rare commodity. I think there was an average of 1 for every 3 soldiers. And so because the Moros were the former enemies of the Americans, they were the last to receive guns. But yet they fought. And so at the Battle of Digos, each night the Moros would slip into the jungle and attack lone Japanese sentries and Japanese patrols, and those attacks so demoralized the Japanese assault force that the commander of the assault force halted the advance and asked for reinforcements, and those reinforcements did not arrive for almost 4 months. So during that time, thank you. During that time, it was because of the Moro actions that in fact General MacArthur was allowed to escape from an American airfield in Mindanao. It looks like I need to jump ahead very quickly to the last war. So in September of 1972, please advance slide. September of 1972, President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law and very soon invaded the Moro homeland once again. So the Moro homeland was invaded for a third time. This time not by foreign forces but by their own countrymen. He had decided to invade Mindanao to confiscate guns and consolidate his power. This third war was very similar to the other two wars. It was very much a David and Goliath affair. You can see here the contrast between the rebels in their dugout canoes and small arms versus the APCs, the armed personnel carriers, and heavy weapons. These armored personnel carriers and heavy weapons and fighter planes and ammunition was all supplied in this war by the United States. So the former ally in World War II had now sided with the dictator and abandoned the Moros to their own fate. Yet despite that abandonment, the Moros were able to fight the dictator, fight the forces of the armed forces of the Philippines to a standstill, and required Marcos to start negotiations for a peace agreement in 1977. Now, the story of those negotiations and the many negotiations that followed, is a very long one, but it has a positive ending. Next slide, please. Here we are 50 years later. Okay, these are the Bangsamoro rebels in 1973. They're tough, they're hardened, but they're also haggard and desperate. And yet, right, after years of fighting, but many more years of negotiations, there are their comrades, their descendants, sitting in the Congress of the Moro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. The Moros were able to achieve a Muslim autonomous region after 50 years, and that Muslim autonomous region is growing and becoming successful and providing development for Mindanao.
Maybe we'll have to stop there for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Just a few housekeeping reminders. If there are people who would need the gadget for the translation, you can get one. We're doing simultaneous translation. The second, housekeeping. Let's do some kind of integrative Q&A. What do I mean by integrative Q&A? Ask. Listen, and then I'll call each of the speakers to respond to what they hear. This way we will get to hear all the questions. Why is that important? So if we run out of time, because the Germans don't let us overstay the way some Filipinos would, if we were because in the Philippines we'll overtime. If we can't go over time, but we've heard your question, there is an opportunity for the authors to please take note, and maybe a conversation can continue as we vacate the stage for others. So if that's okay with you, I've given them time limits. I also give the questions a 1 minute maximum limit as well, please. So may I please raise your hands and ask questions. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that people like the historians that you boomers were raised on, the Agoncillos and the Constantinos didn't talk about Mindanao, right? So why not? What explains the absence of Mindanao in the histories of these people?
Is there another question? Any more from the crowd? Oh, any more questions? Yeah, ipon, sorry. In English, we want to gather the questions. Yeah, my question is, why are there so many untold stories when there are so many invested researchers and scholars working on Mindanao? It seems to me that the word untold gets not just used for this panel, but even for the books and all that. Is it, I don't know why that is. That's my question. Anybody else with a question? None? Okay, then we can answer. Who wants to start? Maybe you. Sorry.
First is the war. The war started in 1975. Second is there's a complete disinterest among Manila intellectuals on the South. I challenge any here from Manila to tell me the history of Mindanao. Complete disinterest. Philippine history is always viewed from the prism of the elite or from the capital, be it leftist or rightist. Okay. Third, the way Philippine education is being taught. There are more classes on French, German, and Latin. There's hardly any courses. Now the university in the Philippines teaches a course on Mindanao languages. No university in the Philippines teaches a course on Mindanao. Number three, you come from, most of the young people who go from Mindanao go to Manila, integrate in Manila, never go back. I'm one of them. But you come back later on. And so there's a backlog on it, big backlog. And Father, you want to add?
Well, I just want to add that it takes insiders to be more articulate in expressing themselves. And it takes time to, give scholarships and subsidies for research from within the Muslims and the indigenous peoples, telling their own stories.
Final point. Mindanao people mistrust Manilas too. I mean, if you ask a Muslim, what is the main problem for them? Why did you rebel? It's not American colonialism, it's Filipino colonialism. Okay, so the enemy is the Philippine state. And it will be very hard for a historian coming from Manila to go there and to tie them to tell them their stories, because the first thing you have to overcome is the deep suspicion that these communities have of outsiders coming from the north. And one way of breaking that is to turn to speak their languages. But none of these people speak their language. They speak Filipino, they speak English. There's no communication there. But the other thing is that they don't care, because a lot of these communities are connected towards Southeast Asia. Okay. Like islands, communities in the South, for example, for 364 of the days of the year, they think Malaysian. The only time they're Filipino is when their dato tells them to vote. So it's an election day, they become Filipino. For the rest of the year, they think Southeast Asians, Malaysians, Chinese, Singaporeans, and all. And so they don't really care about the national story. And so it's a mutual contemptuousness about each other.
I would just second what Jojo says. I was able to go and live in a Moro community and study the Moros, and started in 1985, partly because of my American privilege, that I was able to go there, and Moros weren't able to come and study me in San Francisco. But I was also able to go do it because I was not a Filipino, because I didn't have the history. And I was a genuine outsider. I was a somewhat neutral party in their minds, and I was welcomed into the community and able to live there. It always would have been and was much harder for Filipinos, Christian Filipinos, to gain the trust of the Moros. For the untold story part, because the book on Moro Warrior is really about untold stories. It's a very well-known truism that the victors get to tell the stories, but not all the victors get to tell the stories, right? It's only the victors that have access to publishers, or even pen and paper, and have access to communication systems. The Moros won the war, won the guerrilla war in Mindanao, but they weren't allowed to tell their stories for various reasons. Yes, thank you.
I have a question about the number of wars you talked about. You said 3. So do you have only like the big wars, and what is your because there seems to be many little wars along the way, so and after, along the way and after the biggest, the third one.
Well, yes, I guess we could break it down in various ways, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is we can look at a continuum, right? And so in the beginning of the century, we find that the Moros are fighting to protect their homeland against the Americans. In the middle of the century, we are finding that the Moros have allied and are actually fighting on the side of the Americans to protect their homeland against the Japanese. And then we come to the last quarter of the century, and the Moros are fighting again. This time not against foreign invaders, but against their countrymen, against the dictator. And the Americans, who one would expect to be on the side of their former allies and the underdogs, instead sided with Marcos and supplied Marcos with all the all that was needed to kill Moro civilians and Moro fighters.
Father Alejo, what has been the response to your initiative?
Well, the title of the infographics is Mindanao Sulu Timeline History. I'll tell you the untold story. The original title was Mindanao History Infographics. So I said, we need to double check this with the National Commission for Muslim Filipinos. Some of them got angry. Why do you say Mindanao history? I said, what's the problem? What about Sulu? So we're not included in Mindanao. I said, oh, I thought Mindanao would include Sulu. No, we have a different history. We have a different sultanate. So, okay, let's correct. Mindanao Sulu. And then I checked with the MILF, Moro Islamic Liberation Front, the Bangsamoro Development Authority. When they saw Mindanao-Sulu, they said, Paring Bird, you're driving a wedge between us. We're all Mindanao. I said, wait a minute. We added Sulu because of the National Commission for Muslim Filipinos. Yeah, but and then they said, Paring Bird, this is a problem. And then I showed them the textbooks, etc. And they said, Paring Bird, maybe you should write the history of Bangsamoro. Are you sure? And then they said, yeah, we should be writing our own history and this kind of textbook. So in the end, we had a photo op. The whole committee had a photograph behind in front of the tarpaulin. So now it has been roadshowed in different parts of the region, but I think we need to propagate it even more. But probably, if we double check some of the details here, there should be some corrections. But I think we need something like this. Some people say, oh, why tarpaulin? Now it's a scroll. And well, not really. Many schools still have no access to electricity and signal. And if you put the whole tarpaulin, for example, in the library, every day they pass by, they get a whole glimpse, of the whole landscape. I think it's still important.
Sir Giorgio, could you comment a bit on the sense of nationhood, jumping off from that? If he asked you what the title should be, what would you have advised him?
Mindanao Nation. The Mindanao as nation. Mindanao Sulu as nation. And there's no Philippines. Ignore the Philippines. I just want to add, we're talking about Muslims, indigenous peoples, but there's also a generation of settlers. My parents were settlers from the north. And one of the fascinating things is, if you look at it from Manila, is this intense description that Christians and Muslims and these peoples were fighting with each other. But if you go down to Mindanao, it's more than that. There's intermarriages, there's trade, okay? I grew up with Muslims. My mother would bring in smuggled goods from Singapore through a Muslim leader. There's a lot of intermarriages that goes on between Muslims and Christians. And even the younger generation now think of themselves not just as Christian Muslims, as Mindanaoans. Okay? And that actually partly explains why President Duterte won. Every Mindanaoan said, yeah, it's Imperial Manila who is our enemy. We all belong to an island.
Actually, this is a live question. Right now, there is a movement towards separating not only Mindanao, but also Visayas, Vismin nation. And this has been going on, but right now they're drumming up this call. It's a live issue now.
I'm not sure what the ask is from this panel. Is it more state presence and attention, or less? Or you ended on a very positive note. That surprised me. Is that where you stand? Okay, I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Yes, in a way. So I do want to emphasize that the achievement, right? That what has been achieved by the Bangsamoro, by the Moro people, as a result of this last war in Mindanao and many, many years of negotiation, is a real achievement. Okay, a real, genuine, autonomous government. Those are fairly rare in the world, but there are some good examples of autonomous regions working within overarching states. Now, as Patricio, Dr. Abinales will attest, there are still many hazards out there working against peace and working against autonomy. Some of those hazards are homegrown in Mindanao. Other hazards originate in Manila. But I do think, that the people of Mindanao, all the people of Mindanao, have reason to believe that they will be free from war for the rest of this century.
Every time the Philippine states intervenes in the South, there is war. The sentiment of people in the South is to say, leave us alone. If you leave us alone with our wonderful smuggling trade, with our interaction, you know, the Philippines, 30% of the Philippine economy is illicit, okay? So there's big role. If you leave Mindanao alone, peace continues. So if you look at the history, every time the Philippine state intervenes, there's war, there's division, and there's alienation from the nation. Okay? Today, you're not just talking about Muslims not wanting to be part of the nation. Families who set their children, people from my generation, Visayans, saying, enough of Manila. Okay? Leave us alone. Let us deal with most importantly, allow us to deal with our Southeast Asian connections. Because we are more Southeast Asian than Filipino. We are more connected to this world of the Indonesians, the Singaporeans, the Southern Chinese than with Manila. So that's the theme. I'm sorry.
There is a question from the floor. We have 5 minutes left, so yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting discussion. I also have a question about the peace agreement, the peace process. How was it possible to negotiate the peace agreement, and how important was the involvement of religious leaders? I know that most notably Cardinal Quevedo, for example, he was involved, because maybe this is something which is not as well known over here, and maybe it can be an example for other conflicts as well. What was the motivation behind it?
I'll start and then let Dr. Abinales and Father Bert can provide more expertise. Just to greatly generalize, the motivation for negotiation, the motivation for the peace process, which has been a very long process, was the realization by the Philippine military that there was no military solution to the quote-unquote Moro problem. But there was no, in other words, they could not win through military means, no matter how many armaments they had. They could not defeat the Bangsamoro people. They could not defeat the Bangsamoro rebellion. Okay, the rebels showed time and time again that they could not be easily defeated. So there was an understanding that there had to be some attempt to create a peace agreement and some kind of autonomy. This was a very long process, and the first 2 or 3 attempts were fake autonomy. They were not genuine autonomous regions at all. They didn't work. They were failures. The Moro people did not give up. They said, no, we want the real thing. And so after a very, very long process, they've been able to achieve this most recent one, which is the most genuine autonomous region of all.
Religion plays a big role here. If you examine the composition, for example, of the MNLF and especially MILF peace panel, they have theologians there. Although on the part of the government, they have advisors like Father Mercado. Now, the role, I would like to underline the role of the Bishops' Ulama Conference. Bishops and Ulama, they were very important in the cultural aspect, the cultural foundation of the peace process. Although at a certain point, we needed to insert the indigenous peoples. So normally we say about Moro, but when MOA AD, Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain, was torpedoed in the Supreme Court, GMA, Gloria Macapagal Arroyos, turned to the Bishops' Ulama Conference to say, hey, if we cannot talk to the rebels now, we should talk to the people. So we conducted 311 focus group discussions all over Mindanao and even in some parts of Visayas. And it's what's called Consult Mindanao. We made sure that the indigenous peoples were properly represented. I think the religious sector was important, except during the time of Pinoy. GMA spent a lot of money for interreligious dialogue, not Pinoy.
Yes, there's one last question. Maybe the last 2 minutes.
Yes, you had once a president from Mindanao, Duterte, and he was the mayor, I think, of Davao, and his daughter is the mayor of Davao. So what was the attitude to this conflict from the Duterte time? I mean, he was very cruel, sort of president and dictator at the same time. So what did he do for reconciliation?
Well, there comes near Duterte who were proposing separation of Mindanao, like Alvarez. Alvarez came to me saying, "Hey, here's the design for the national flag of Republic of Mindanao, and what's your anthem? English. And who will be the leader there? Duterte." So some factions close to Duterte wanted Mindanao for them, but then they realized they could win the Philippines, so they got the Philippines. Now, take note, the peace agreement would be peace agreement with the communists and with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. We have not achieved a peace agreement with the National Democratic Front, probably never, but we managed to get a peace agreement with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, but it is a product of a series of dialogues. So it's not just the Duterte factor. Now, there's also the problem of the Moro National Liberation Front and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, but I think there was a problem, for example, in the Zamboanga siege. But fortunately, during the time of Duterte, there was a peace agreement, and it's still a struggle. It's called the Bangsamoro, but within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, there's a continuing struggle of the Lumad, the non-Moro indigenous peoples who want to autonomy within autonomy.
So one last. Okay.
Duterte is extremely popular. Whether you like it or not, people, the way he advertised the drug war was, we're going to save your neighbor. We're going to kill the local drug dealer there. And so local people like it. But what is not mentioned is that Duterte lives in an island where there are 40 private armies. So in order to neutralize Duterte, you have to neutralize the 40 private armies all over the island. And here's the funny thing. I was in Washington, D.C., and this was mentioned. So I told the Americans, hey, you're the empire. You have the intelligence. Why don't you just kill all these private armies so that Filipinos and Mindanaoans could exercise things peace? And here is where the sort of hypocritical decorum among states come in. They can't do that. And so you have the United States, even Germany, paying homage to President Duterte as president because of the title. When my simple suggestion was, you guys know who they are. You know who's running the drug trade in Mindanao. You're the American empire. You have special forces. Kill them all. And then it levels the playing field so people like me can vote. But that cannot happen because of the hypocrisies of states. So in a very weird way, this hypocritical diplomatic relation, the way states recognize each other, actually can abet people like Duterte in the same way as it abets Trump.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but I hope that from our speakers, you got a sense of the problems that we face, but also a sense of some of the achievements that have been made and some actions that are being taken to try to learn more about the history, politics, and culture of Mindanao. Thank you very much.